The Resident Evil franchise has been punishing players for nearly 30 years, and some of its hardest areas aren't boss fights or final levels. They're the places you've already been, the rooms you thought were safe. Today, I'm breaking down every brutally difficult area in the franchise and why they work so well. Starting with the one that rewrote the rules of survival horror halfway through the game, Spencer Mansion. Part 2/After Hunters Are Released. The first half of Resident Evil is a lie. The game spends hours teaching you how the Spencer Mansion works. You learn the hallways, you memorize which doors connect to which rooms, you figure out the puzzle logic, and you get comfortable killing slow, shambling zombies with carefully rationed ammo. You feel like you've cracked the code. But then you trigger a story event, and hunters get released into the mansion, and everything you learned becomes the reason you die. Here's where it gets interesting. Hunters aren't just tougher zombies. They're genetically engineered apex predators built by Umbrella, and they fight like it. Their jumping claw attack deals roughly 650 damage, which is enough to kill you outright if your health is even slightly below max. They can chain 4 consecutive tail swipes in close quarters, and there's basically nothing you can do about it once you're caught. They're fast, they're aggressive, and they don't stumble around waiting for you to line up a headshot. But the real cruelty isn't the hunters themselves, it's where they are. These aren't new rooms. These are the exact same corridors you've been walking through for hours, the ones you felt confident navigating. The game deliberately weaponized your own familiarity against you. In 1996, almost nothing did that. You'd learn the mansion's rhythms, and Capcom used that comfort to destroy you? This was the franchise's first truly formidable non-boss enemy, and the community's reaction was genuine shock. Players who assumed they'd figured out the game's systems were suddenly getting torn apart in hallways they thought they owned. The confidence the first half built wasn't accidental, it was set up for the kill, and the ultimate proof of how punishing these encounters were? Speedrunners eventually developed sequence-breaking strategies specifically to avoid hunters entirely. The optimal solution for a huge chunk of the community wasn't to get better at fighting them, it was to never fight them at all. When the best players in the world decide the smartest move is to skip your enemy completely, that enemy earned its reputation. But at least the mansion above ground follows its own rules. The moment you descend into what's underneath it, those rules stop applying entirely. Basement. Here's the thing about the underground laboratory beneath Spencer Mansion. Everything above it, every corridor, every puzzle, every perfectly placed zombie, was designed with surgical precision. The mansion is a masterclass in survival horror architecture. Rooms connect logically. Safe rooms give you breathing space at exactly the right moments. Enemy placement teaches you to think before you move. But the basement throws all of that out the window. The moment you descend into Umbrella's underground research facility, the game changes personality. The carefully constructed rhythm of exploration, puzzle solving, and measured combat that defined the entire mansion experience just vanishes. What replaces it is a gauntlet. Corridors packed with enemies, toxic environmental hazards eating away at your health, confined spaces so tight you can barely maneuver around threats, and almost zero safe rooms to catch your breath. Your resources, which you've been carefully managing for hours, get chewed through at an alarming rate. And the difficulty is real. Nobody's arguing that. The concentrated enemy pressure combined with scarce ammunition and healing items creates genuine survival tension. You're making impossible choices about what to fight, what to dodge, and what to simply absorb damage from while sprinting past. The toxic atmosphere in certain sections drains your health passively, which means even the spaces between enemies are hurting you. But here's where the community gets vocal. The basement isn't hard in the way the mansion is hard. The mansion challenges you through clever design, through puzzles that require thought, through enemy placements that punish carelessness but reward observation. The basement just throws volume at you. It's attrition difficulty, the kind achieved by cramming threats into tight spaces rather than designing encounters that test your decision making. The architectural coherence disappears entirely. Rooms feel disconnected. Corridors exist purely to funnel you into the next batch of enemies, and the whole section carries this unmistakable feeling of being rushed compared to the meticulously crafted floors above. Players have described it for decades as the wrong kind of hard, and that distinction matters enormously. But the most damning evidence doesn't come from the community. It comes from Capcom themselves. When the Resident Evil remake was developed, the underground lab was effectively excluded from meaningful redesign. That's not a subtle signal. A hard area that survives into a remake is validation. validation, proof that the design holds up. A hard area that gets cut or gutted from a remake is an admission. Capcom looked at their own work and essentially agreed with every player who said the basement didn't meet the standards set by the mansion above it. That makes the underground lab one of the most instructive areas in the entire franchise, not because it's badly made, but because it sits directly beneath one of the greatest survival horror environments ever designed, and the contrast is brutal. Same game, and same developers. Visibly different design philosophy. The mansion rewards you for engaging with its systems. The basement punishes you for existing in it. It's the franchise's clearest early lesson in the difference between difficulty and good difficulty. Being hard isn't enough. The question is whether the difficulty serves the experience or fights against it. The basement fights against it, and 20 plus years of player feedback and Capcom's own decisions confirm exactly that. But if you think Resident Evil's basement is the wrong kind of hard, wait until you see what Resident Evil 2 does with an entire underground network, because the sewers don't just punish you, they bury you. Sewers. Resident Evil 2's sewer system isn't one difficult moment. It's an entire gauntlet designed to slowly crush you from every angle at once, and it's honestly one of the best examples of sustained difficulty in the entire franchise. Here's the thing. Most hard areas in Resident Evil hit you with a single overwhelming threat. A boss, a room full of enemies, a puzzle that makes you want to throw your controller. The sewers do all three simultaneously in the same connected space, with zero breathing room between them. Let's start with the layout itself, because the architecture is working against you before a single enemy even shows up. The sewer system operates as a one-way looping route, with extremely limited backtracking options. Once you commit to a path, you're locked in. You can't just turn around and retreat to safety when things go sideways, and things absolutely go sideways. But the real kicker is what's waiting for you down there. G. Birkin in his second mutation form shows up mid-sewer, not in some dedicated boss arena where you can prepare and strategize. He just appears while you're still trying to figure out where you're going. You're expected to manage a full-blown boss encounter while simultaneously navigating toward puzzle solutions you haven't even found yet. It's like being asked to solve a math test while someone throws furniture at you. And speaking of puzzles, let's talk about the chess piece puzzle. Who looked at a sewer system and thought, you know what this needs? Chess. You have to recover specific chess-themed plugs scattered across different areas and slot them into the correct positions in the correct sequence. That alone would be annoying enough, but the solution changes between your first and second playthroughs. So if you thought you were clever for memorizing it last time, congratulations. You're wrong now. But the nastiest subsection is the bottom waterway. This is where the game stops pretending to be fair. You're forced to navigate around the G creature encounter while simultaneously collecting mandatory items. There's no option to just avoid the threat and come back later. You need those items to progress, and the monster is standing between you and every single one of them. It's collect or die, and usually it's both. Contemporary guides and community discussions consistently flag this section as one of Resident Evil 2's biggest sticking points, especially for first-time players going in blind. The puzzle design is deliberately counterintuitive. The spatial layout punishes any attempt to brute force your way through, and the combination of all these elements happening at once creates difficulty through accumulation, rather than any single spike. It's death by 1,000 cuts, and every cut is in a sewer that smells like chess pieces and regret. But if you think the sewers were suffocating, wait until you see what Resident Evil does with a hospital and an underground storage facility, because that's where the walls really start closing in. Hospital/underground storage. You'd think surviving the sewers would earn you a breather, maybe a safe room, a couple of herb pickups, a moment to collect yourself. Instead, Resident Evil 2 looks at your depleted inventory and says, perfect, now the real fight starts. The hospital and underground storage complex is where the game stops wearing you down and starts trying to finish you off. Where the sewers were sprawling and maze-like, this place is compressed and suffocating. Multiple connecting chambers, barely any safe areas, and advanced G creature mutations sharing hallways with regular zombies. It's a claustrophobic nightmare designed to punish anyone who thought the worst was behind them. But here's what makes it genuinely cruel. The G creatures you encounter here aren't the relatively manageable early mutations. These are advanced stages, bigger, faster, and far more aggressive. They're occupying the same tight corridors as standard zombies and environmental hazards, which means your usual engagement tactics fall apart completely. You can't circle strafe when there's no room to circle. You can't create distance when the walls are 3 feet away. Every single fight becomes a close quarters coin flip. Spend the ammo you don't have or eat the damage you can't afford. And that's not an accident. The facility's signature design choice is the bottleneck encounter. Limited floor space means your positioning becomes the only survival variable that matters. In earlier sections, you could absorb a mistake, take a hit, Burn an extra shotgun shell, course correct. Here, mistakes compound. One bad dodge leads to a healing item, which leads to an empty inventory slot you needed for a key item, which leads to backtracking through a hallway you already barely survived. The difficulty cascades instead of resetting, but here's where it gets darkly funny. Speedrunners have mapped out incredibly specific resource conservation strategies for this exact section. They know precisely which enemies to skip, which corners to hug, which frames to exploit. The fact that those strategies exist tells you something important. This area is completely beatable with clean execution. The difficulty isn't unfair, it's demanding. It expects you to play perfectly at the exact moment the game has spent hours making sure you can't. Community discussion consistently flags this as the late game difficulty spike that blindsides players. You arrive here already drained from the sewers, running low on everything, and the game immediately throws encounters calibrated for someone who still has a full inventory. It's a resource management trap that the entire back half of the game has been quietly building toward, and by the time you realize it, you're already inside it. At least the hospital is contained to a single facility. Rockford Island stretches that same suffocating pressure across an entire game. Rockford Island, Claire's section, Code Veronica, doesn't believe in warm-up rounds. You press start, you pick up the controller, and the game is already trying to kill you. There's no gentle introduction, no tutorial hallway, no here's how the controls work section. Claire Redfield wakes up in a military concentration camp on Rockford Island, and from that moment forward, the game expects you to already know what you're doing. Here's the thing. Players coming off Resident Evil 2 thought they were ready for this. They'd survived Raccoon City. They'd navigated the sewers, dodged Birkin, managed their resources through the police station. They felt qualified. But Code Veronica operates on a completely different philosophy than anything before it. Resident Evil 2 had a curve. It started manageable, built tension gradually, and saved its hardest moments for the back half. Code Veronica starts hard and stays hard. There is no curve. There's just a wall, and you either climb it or you don't. The prison complex itself is the first real test, and it's brutal. Rockford Island is run by Alfred Ashford, and the entire facility is designed as a concentration camp for prisoner control. That means narrow corridors, cell blocks, guard posts, and choke points everywhere you look. This isn't a mansion with grand hallways and multiple escape routes. This is a facility built to keep people trapped, and it works just as well on the player as it does on the prisoners. Prison Area D is where most people first realize they're in trouble. The layout funnels you into tight spaces where zombies are already positioned in the worst possible spots. You can't reposition. You can't circle around them. You walk into a corridor and something is already blocking your path, and the walls are so close together that dodging isn't really an option. Every encounter feels like an ambush because the architecture was literally designed for ambushes, but the real killer isn't the enemies, it's the resources. Earlier Resident Evil games gave you a little breathing room to explore, to experiment, to waste a few rounds figuring out what worked. Code Veronica doesn't offer that luxury. Every single bullet matters from the opening minutes. Every herb you pick up needs to be used at exactly the right moment. The margin for error is essentially zero, and the game establishes this before you've even found your second save room. This is why the community consistently ranks Code Veronica above earlier entries in terms of raw difficulty. The Rockfort Prison section functions as a skill check, plain and simple. It filters experienced players from newcomers within the first hour. If you can't manage your inventory with near-perfect efficiency while navigating a claustrophobic death trap full of enemies positioned at every choke point, the game has no interest in helping you catch up. And the worst part, the prison section is just the beginning. Because if you think tight corridors and scarce ammo are bad, wait until you're fighting a tyrant inside an airplane cargo hold with nowhere to run. Plane/tyrant fight, cargo hold code. Veronica's cargo hold. Tyrant Fight is one of the cleanest examples of difficulty design in the entire franchise, and it's because everything about it is working against you at the same time. The setup is simple. You're trapped in the cargo bay of a plane with a tyrant that wants you dead, and the room is barely big enough to breathe in. That's it. That's the whole fight. But here's where it gets interesting, because unlike almost every other boss arena in the series up to that point, there's nowhere to go. Earlier Resident Evil games gave you room to work with. You could circle bosses, find angles, create distance, buy yourself a few seconds to heal. The cargo hold gives you none of that. The space is so compressed that the choice boils down to two options. Stand and trade hits with a creature that massively outclasses you physically, or try to run in a room where running isn't really possible. But the spatial design isn't just a gameplay gimmick. This is one of the rare moments in Resident Evil where the difficulty actually means something narratively. You are literally trapped on a plane with this thing. The walls closing in on you mechanically mirror the story closing in on you narratively, and that kind of integration almost never happens in this franchise. Boss fights in Resident Evil are usually just boss fights. This one feels like it's about something, the desperation, the finality, the fact that there is no backup plan. And then there's the resource problem, which is where the community has been arguing for over 2 decades. By the time you reach this fight, you've clawed your way through all of Rockford Island and everything that came before it. Your supplies are wrecked, ammo is low, healing items are scarce, and now the game is asking you to go toe-to-toe with one of the toughest enemies in Code Veronica's roster. The question that nobody has definitively answered is whether this fight was designed expecting players to have hoarded specific ammunition types throughout the entire game, or whether it simply punishes anyone who played normally and used resources as they found them. Speedrunners and challenge runners have tested this extensively. Bare minimum resource attempts at this fight are genuinely brutal. There's documented footage of players attempting it with almost nothing, and the results speak for themselves. The encounter tips from difficult into outright cruel. If you know exactly which ammo types to bring and you understand the tyrant's attack patterns, the fight becomes manageable. Difficult, but manageable. But a blind player hitting this encounter on depleted resources has every right to feel cheated, because the game never clearly communicates that you needed to be saving for this specific moment. That tension between knowledge and punishment is what keeps this fight in the conversation decades later. It rewards mastery, but it doesn't teach you what mastery looks like until it's already too late. But if you think a confined plane is claustrophobic, wait until you see what Resident Evil 0 does with a basement. Training facility, especially the basement. Resident Evil 0's training facility basement is where Capcom stopped pretending survival horror was about zombies and went straight for your nervous system. The mechanical challenge down here is real, don't get me wrong, but the reason this section lives rent-free in the community's collective nightmares has nothing to do with ammo counts or health management. It's the spiders. Massive, hairy, grotesquely oversized spiders that are substantially larger than anything the franchise had thrown at players before this point. And the community response wasn't, ugh, tough enemy. It was documented, widespread, genuine arachnophobic panic. Capcom knew exactly what they were doing, but here's where the design gets genuinely nasty. The basement corridors are deliberately sized to eliminate every comfort tactic you've been relying on. Distance management? Gone. Circling around enemies to buy yourself breathing room? Impossible. The spaces are specifically built so that every spider encounter feels inescapable, like the walls are closing in while something with 8 legs charges directly at your face. You can't create space because there is no space to create. And the game doesn't stop there. Right when you're already on edge from the spider gauntlet, a zombie baboon appears without any warning whatsoever. This thing lunges at Rebecca, triggers her fall, and separates her from Billy. Just like that, your partner system, the mechanic you've been leaning on for the entire game, gets ripped away at the exact moment you need it most. The game removes your agency through a narrative event, then immediately follows it up with isolation mechanics that compound every ounce of psychological pressure the basement has already built. You're alone, you're under-resourced, and the things hunting you were specifically designed to make your skin crawl. Here's the thing. What separates this basement from other franchise difficulty spikes is something speedrunners and veterans consistently point out. It stays dangerous even when you know everything. That almost never happens in Resident Evil. The standard pattern across the franchise is that hard sections become manageable once you understand the layout, the enemy placement, the resource locations. Knowledge is supposed to be your ultimate weapon, but the training facility basement is still legitimately threatening to fully informed players running optimal strategies. That tells you the difficulty is structural, baked into the geometry and the encounter design itself, not dependent on surprise or ignorance. The community consistently identifies this basement as one of the franchise's best examples of integrated horror design, and it's hard to argue with that assessment. The creature design triggers primal fear responses. The environmental layout removes tactical options. The narrative separation strips away your safety net, and the cumulative effect of all three working together creates difficulty that's genuinely greater than any single component. It's not just hard, it's oppressively, psychologically hard in a way that earns its reputation every single playthrough. But if you think confined spaces and nightmare creatures are bad, wait until the franchise forces you to solve puzzles while something is actively trying to drown you. Water Room. Resident Evil 4 is one of the most combat-heavy games in the entire franchise. It's relentless. Cultists, chainsaw maniacs, parasites bursting out of heads. The game barely lets you breathe for 20 hours straight, so naturally Similarly, the hardest section for a huge chunk of players is one of its most purely combat-focused rooms, and it earns that reputation by making you fight on two fronts simultaneously. The Waterhall is a large, multi-tiered castle chamber segmented by rectangular pools into narrow walkways, and the moment you step inside, hordes of Illuminados come pouring in from every direction. Flail-wielding cultists on the lower level, archers firing from elevated positions, a red cultist commanding the group who sprouts a Stage B Plaga the moment you damage him enough. That alone would be manageable. But here's the part that makes it genuinely brutal. Ashley has to turn the cranks that let you escape, several of them, and the ones that matter most are positioned on walkways too high for Leon to reach, which means you have to boost her up there, completely exposed, and then hold off wave after wave of Illuminados who are specifically trying to kidnap her, while she slowly turns the mechanism you need. The moment she's up on that platform, you've split your attention entirely. You're simultaneously managing your own survival on the lower level, and watching the upper walkways for anyone closing in on her. Let one cultist get past you, and it's a game over. Here's where it gets really nasty. Triggering the cranks spawns additional enemies, so the players who try to clear the room before activating anything get hit with a second wave mid-process, and the players who prioritize speed and rush the cranks immediately arrive unprepared for the escalation. There's no clean order of operations. Whatever approach you choose, the room has a response waiting for you. The community response to the Waterhall has been consistent for nearly 20 years. It's not hated, it's respected and feared, and players consistently flag it as one of the castle's nastiest gauntlets, precisely because the difficulty isn't coming from any single source. It's the combination: the crowd, the architecture, the divided attention, and the constant threat of Ashley getting dragged off screen while you're mid-reload. Community tricks have been discovered and passed down for years, including leaving the room between fights to reset and checkpoint, something the game never tells you is possible. It's been infamous since 2005, and the 2023 remake added the Halo wheel mechanic on top of everything else, making an already notorious room even more mechanically layered. 2 decades of players, and this room is still generating strategy threads and speedrunning debate. That's not a coincidence, and that's the design working exactly as intended. But if you think managing a combat gauntlet while babysitting a hostage is stressful, wait until you meet the thing lurking in the castle's nitrogen storage facility, because the Verdugo doesn't care how smart you are. Verdugo, encounter and surrounding castle sections. Every boss in Resident Evil 4 can be brute forced with enough ammunition and patience. Every boss except one. The Verdugo fight is built differently than anything else in the franchise because the environment isn't a backdrop, it's the weapon. The liquid nitrogen systems scattered throughout the facility aren't a helpful bonus or a clever shortcut. They're the entire strategy. Players who walk into this fight thinking they can just unload magazines into Verdugo and watch it die are about to learn an extremely expensive lesson. Here's the thing. Verdugo has 20,000 HP. That number alone makes it one of the most durable non-human enemies in franchise history. But the raw health pool isn't even the real problem. Its claw strikes deal 650 damage per hit, its jumping claw attack requires frame-specific dodge timing that punishes hesitation and panic equally, and its tail attacks chain in rapid succession, creating compound damage scenarios where a single missed dodge cascades into near-instant death. You're not fighting a boss. You're fighting a blender with legs. But here's where the design gets genuinely clever. The nitrogen freezing mechanic transforms this from a standard boss encounter into a puzzle boss hybrid, and players have to interact with the environmental systems to temporarily freeze Verdugo, creating narrow vulnerability windows where standard weapons actually deal meaningful damage. Without those windows, the ammunition required to chip through 20,000 HP conventionally is so massive it can cripple the entire rest of your run. We're talking about dumping resources you desperately need for later chapters into a single fight that the game clearly designed you to solve differently. And the punishment starts long before you reach Verdugo. The surrounding castle sections function as a deliberate resource drain. Enemy density is high, safe zones are almost non-existent, and the attrition of simply getting to the encounter is engineered to thin your supplies. The boss fight and everything preceding it aren't separate challenges. They're one extended difficulty zone designed to squeeze you from both ends, fewer resources going in, massive resource demands once you arrive. But the part nobody talks about is what happens when players refuse the intended solution entirely. The community has built a genuine subculture around the too cool for such tricks approach, approach, where challenge runners specifically attempt to kill Verdugo without touching a single nitrogen valve. The results are brutal. These runs require extraordinary ammunition investment, precise weapon selection, and near-perfect execution across an agonizingly long fight. What these attempts actually reveal is something fundamental about the game's balance philosophy. The nitrogen system isn't a hint, it's load-bearing. The entire encounter is balanced around the assumption that you'll use it, and stripping it away exposes just how punishing the raw numbers are. Knowledge is the great equalizer for this fight, and it's not subtle about it. Informed players know to save specific ammunition types for the vulnerability windows. They know the nitrogen timing, they recognize attack patterns, and understand spacing. A veteran can handle Verdugo efficiently and walk away with resources intact. A blind player encountering this fight for the first time? Categorically different experience. They burn through ammo trying to damage an enemy that barely flinches, they panic when the tail chains start, and they might not even realize the nitrogen systems are interactive until they've already exhausted half their inventory. The gap between first playthrough difficulty and informed playthrough difficulty is wider here than almost anywhere else in the franchise, and that gap is entirely by design. But if you think an enemy with 20,000 HP and a nitrogen gimmick is the ceiling for Resident Evil difficulty design, wait until the franchise skips biological horror entirely and builds something mechanical, industrial, and in some ways far more relentless. Heisenberg's Factory. Heisenberg's Factory is the newest entry on this list, and it earns its spot by doing something no other area in the franchise has ever really pulled off. It uses verticality as a weapon against you. Every other brutal location in Resident Evil history operates on a relatively flat plane. You move through corridors, you open doors, you manage space horizontally. But Heisenberg's Factory is built like a vertical industrial nightmare, with multiple connected floors, elevator systems that dump you into unfamiliar territory, and mechanical hazards grinding away on every level. The spatial disorientation this creates is genuinely unique. Biological horror environments feel organic, almost navigable by instinct, but an industrial complex with catwalks, conveyor systems, and shafts dropping into darkness, your brain can't map that the same way. You lose your sense of where you are, and in a survival horror game, losing your bearings is losing control. But here's where it gets interesting. The enemies in this section aren't infected humans or bioweapons. They're mechanical constructs, soldats, cyborg amalgamations of flesh and machinery that Heisenberg built as his personal army. The shift from biological to mechanical threat changes the entire texture of difficulty. There's no visceral body horror making you flinch. Instead, there's this relentless, industrial grinding quality, like the factory itself is trying to process you. The sustained pressure doesn't come from jump scares or grotesque transformations. It comes from sheer mechanical punishment, wave after wave, with resources draining faster than you can replenish them, and that resource drain is deliberate. The factory sections leading to Heisenberg are designed to bleed you dry through sustained encounters against powerful enemies with limited replenishment opportunities. By the time you reach the boss fight, you're already running on fumes. Classic Resident Evil attrition design, perfected over 25 years and deployed with surgical precision. But the boss fight itself is where everything goes sideways. Heisenberg's encounter opens with a tank combat sequence, and this is the single most mechanically disruptive moment across all 10 areas on this list. Nothing else we've covered fundamentally changes how you move and fight mid-encounter. The tank controls replace your character movement entirely, dramatically increasing your vulnerability because you're piloting a vehicle instead of a person. Every evasion instinct you've built through the entire game becomes useless. The attack patterns are specifically designed to punish conventional dodge strategies, so players who arrive expecting to apply what they've learned get corrected immediately. Then Heisenberg shifts to his humanoid form, and the fight demands specific damage pattern recognition that punishes the dodge and shoot rhythm players have been refining since the game's opening hours. He hits differently than anything before him, with attack windows designed to catch you mid-reaction if you're playing on autopilot. But here's the part nobody talks about enough. On Village of Shadows difficulty, this entire section transcends hard and enters genuinely cruel territory. Enemy damage output requires near-perfect defensive execution on every single encounter. Movement mechanics prevent you from maintaining reliable distance from threats. Resource scarcity means that combat luck, actual randomness in item drops, and enemy behavior becomes a meaningful variable alongside raw player skill. The difficulty ceiling doesn't just rise. It breaks through into a space where demanding becomes punishing, and punishing becomes something you either respect or walk away from entirely. The community is still debating whether Heisenberg's factory has truly earned its place alongside the franchise's legendary difficult areas. It's only a few years old, which means it hasn't had decades of speedrunning analysis and nostalgic reverence to cement its reputation, but the fact that experienced Resident Evil players consistently flag it as genuinely difficult at standard settings, and outright notorious on higher difficulties says something. The technical sophistication is there. The design philosophy is there. The question isn't whether the factory belongs in the conversation, it's whether the conversation has fully caught up to it yet. And honestly, after 25 years of Resident Evil finding new ways to make players suffer, the fact that Capcom can still design an area that sparks genuine debate about difficulty legitimacy, that's the real achievement. The franchise started with zombies in a mansion and arrived at a cyborg factory where a magnetism-powered madman forces you to fight him in a tank. The methods change. The commitment to making you earn every inch of progress never does. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.